So, I've been going back and forth on what to do with this channel, and I've decided to play to my strengths, how meager they are, and focus on geopolitics more generally, although maintaining a focus on the United States' international military policy specifically. What I hope to do is provide additional historical and other context to relevant topical events as they occur. With that all being said, the first thing I want to take a look at is what is emerging as the new United States national security strategy under President Trump. We do not yet have President Trump's NSS, or National Security Strategy, and considering it usually takes at least a year to produce one, that's not really surprising. To clear up a bit, though, the NSS is a document the executive branch produces and is the main instrument for forming U.S. foreign and certain domestic policy towards national security as directed by the President. There are subsidiary documents that usually accompany this, such as the National Defense Strategy, or NDS, and the National Military Strategy, the NMS. It is tempting to assume that the new NSS will generally adhere to the previous one, but I think based on certain early statements by the president and some of his subordinate officials, I think we may see some key changes as the new one is formed. First, let's take a look at the old strategy. It was built on four pillars or guiding objectives. Number one, protect the homeland, the American people, and the American way of life. Number two, promote American prosperity. Number three, preserve peace through strength. And number four, advance American influence. While the first three, I believe, will be maintained, I think the fourth may actually be dropped, and I'll describe why further below. Furthermore, the 2017 NSS lists three buckets of major challenges in decreasing level of priority, and I will apply my own titles to help explain each one. Number one, near-peer or peer competitors. Revisionist powers such as China and Russia that use technology, propaganda, and coercion to shape a world antithetical to our interests and values. Number two, regional bad actors. Regional dictators that spread terror, threaten their neighbors, and pursue weapons of mass destruction. Number three, non-state actors. Jihadist terrorists that foment hatred to incite violence against innocents in the name of a wicked ideology, and transnational criminal organizations that spill drugs and violence into our communities. Beyond the clear hierarchy that I see here, an important note on the near-peer threat is that both Russia and China are within this category, and also that the main concern was not necessarily direct military threat, but malign influence that could undermine U.S. interests and influence the wider global community. So now I want to take a look at Secretary of Defense Hegseth's opening remarks at the Munich conference. I am not going to play them in full, but only go over the relevant parts of this discussion.
We're also here today to directly and unambiguously express that stark strategic realities prevent the United States of America from being primarily focused on the security of Europe.
So here the U.S. is clearly establishing priority and noting that Europe, and by extension countering and containing Russia, is not the highest priority for the current administration. One could also interpret it as noting that the untapped resources of Europe could more effectively counter Russian revanchism, while the United States is the only player that can counter the other threats Secretary Hegseth will go over.
The United States faces consequential threats to our homeland. We must and we are focusing on security of our own borders.
So this statement aligns very well with the first priority from the 2017 NSS and really doesn't represent a change between the two administrations. However, while the focus appears to be centered on the border and illicit movement of goods and migrants, it may also extend to traditional transnational threats. This may include not only the various drug cartels, which appear to be a major target for the current administration, but may also include counterterrorism efforts aimed at jihadists, for example. If I was to wander to the extremes, it may be anticipating social political unrest akin to the 2020 instability in the wake of the George Floyd incident.
We also face a peer competitor in the communist Chinese, with the capability and intent to threaten our homeland and core national interests in the Indo-Pacific. The U.S. is prioritizing deterring war with China in the Pacific, recognizing the reality of scarcity and making the resourcing trade-offs to ensure deterrence does not fail. Deterrence cannot fail for all of our sakes.
There are several changes here that are worth going over. First, regarding China itself, the specific naming of China as a peer competitor is important language, noting that the United States would have to rely on a majority of its resources to counter, let alone deter it. To be clear, counter would be the ability to engage and have a reasonable chance of winning a war. while deterring would be having sufficient military and other strength to convince the Chinese in this example that the risks of war outweigh the potential gain and/or likelihood of success if tested. Next, the threats to the United States are direct and immediate, as those threats to the U.S. homeland and core national interests are specifically mentioned. In other words, it is an existential competition and not merely a contest over global influence in the Trump administration's articulation here. Also of note here is that Russia is gone from the equation totally. Now, there are three possible reasons for this that I can come up with. The first is that the U.S. views Russia as sufficiently weakened as to no longer be even a near-peer competitor anymore. The second is that the United States no longer views Russia necessarily as an adversary or is concerned with the previous malign influence activity they mentioned. The third is that although the Russian threat may remain, the threats to the homeland and from China now far outstrip it from being an immediate consequence, and also the calculus may be that U.S. resources are now more finite than they were during the previous Trump administration. If I was to apply the same logic of the third hypothesis and extend it out a bit, that may be why we don't hear anything about countering bad regional actors such as North Korea, Iran, or Venezuela, for example, as immediate priorities. But they may emerge in later discourse, so they might just not have been appropriate to the forum. Also gone is any mention of preserving, let alone advancing, American interest, and in fact, the speech makes it clear that the United States appears to be planning to cede influence over European security as part of its national security strategy. We may see a similar withdrawal of U.S. attempts to influence outcomes in other regions as a priority, such as in the Middle East, South Asia, and Africa. But we'll have to wait and see on that. To sum up, based on Secretary Hegseth's speech, it seems that the Trump administration is going to maintain certain core components of its national security strategy, such as focusing on deterring China and shoring up homeland border security, but that it is going to husband its resources and draw back from other commitments. They have made that intent clear as far as European security and Russian containment goes, but I have a feeling it may well extend to other regions as well, although at this point that is speculation. This is not the first time the United States has attempted to refocus efforts on the Pacific and the homeland, historically, but the rest of the world has a habit of dragging the United States back to the old order. At least those are my initial thoughts. Please let me know what you think of my analysis below. Also, if you have any thoughts on the current U.S. national security policy or where you think it should be focused on, also leave a comment. I love hearing from you. As always, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and thanks again for watching.